This is the Multifaith Matters podcast. I'm your host, John Moorhead. Well, this is the podcast for Multifaith Matters, and I am the host, John Moorhead. And today I'm privileged to have as my guest Lilith Starr, who thankfully is flexible in rescheduling. We were going to do this a little earlier, but I had some challenges on my end, but here we are. I'm going to read her bio from her book. Lilith Starr is the author of The Happy Satanist, Finding Self-Empowerment, and she is the recipient of the Satanic Temple's first Anatole, France Literary Excellence Award. Hopefully I pronounced that name correctly there. She holds a BA in English from Harvard and an MA in journalism from Stanford. And today we're going to be discussing her new book, Compassionate Satanism, An Introduction to Modern Satanic Practice. And for those of you who are not just listening, but watching, if you're watching on YouTube, there it is right there. And I always try and pick up the books of those authors who I'm discussing so that I can be a little more informed in having this conversation. Lilith, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you so much. I'm quite honored to be on here. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to be here. You know, I like to start these conversations on a personal note. What is your personal journey? How did you, a lot of people can say, well, I was raised Jewish or I was born into a Buddhist family. But I kind of think, given the numbers, that you probably weren't born into a Satanist family. So what's your story?
Yeah, considering that our religion was founded in 2013, I'm not quite that young. But so I grew up, my parents were really super back to the land hippies. So I grew up without electricity or running water or a phone or any of that good stuff. I'm quite fond of indoor plumbing now that I'm an adult. But so we lived out in the wilderness, first in Alaska and then in Northern California, out there in the boonies. And my parents weren't really any particular religion. I asked my mom when I was 7, I asked her, is there a God, basically? And she said, some people believe there is, but you can, choose your own path. I actually got into Christianity very young, but I had some bad experiences. So I sort of left it behind and I started following the Wiccan movement, which at the time.
What time frame was this around?
Let's see. So I was 11 when I became Christian and 12 when I became Wiccan. So I think it was 1984.
Okay, wow.
And, Wicca was still very new.
Right.
I read what books there were and I started building a Wiccan practice, and that lasted through my undergrad years at Harvard. And the interesting thing is, so I was Wiccan during the 80s, and, I wore a pentagram, just the other way around. And I didn't know that this thing called the Satanic Panic was happening. So, I was just kind of clueless, and I didn't know why people were so freaked out by my pentagram. But now I realize, people believed that there were cults of Satanists, abusing and killing people in rituals. Just some of the stuff they believed was really quite off the charts. So now I know why people were kind of freaked out. So I was Wiccan at the beginning. I went through a phase of Zen Buddhism, and I still sit in meditation every day, but it's not particularly any kind of religion. I just find it helps with my mental illness. I have pretty bad depression and anxiety. So eventually I kind of had this self-created mix of Zen Buddhism and Wicca. I was following this mix of Wicca, sort of goddess-based religion, and Zen Buddhism, which is very non-theistic, right? There's no superstitious, or, there's no deity, anything like that. So what I was doing was much more like psychological to myself, as opposed to supplicating, an actual deity. And then I met my current husband, Burrick, and I fell in love with him. And this was in 2010. So I was like 38, I think. I was really old to fall this deeply in love. And we left the little town that we were living in, and we tried to move down to the San Francisco Bay Area, but we got there and we couldn't find housing. The housing is incredibly expensive. So we ended up actually homeless. We ended up homeless on the streets for a couple days, and then a friend paid for a motel. And during that time, my partner had a Satanic Bible, and I read it cover to cover, and it most of it really spoke to me, and it gave me this sense that there wasn't necessarily something wrong with me. Like I'd spent my whole life thinking that, because I was really heavily bullied as a child, and so I was convinced there was something wrong with me. And of course, the depression doesn't help with that. But so I read the Satanic Bible, which was basically about, kind of seeing yourself as your own higher power. And that spoke to me. And for the first time, it really sparked my self-compassion and sort of the notion that, society itself was not all that put together either. Like when you're homeless, you just experience people treating you like you're a cockroach. It's the hardest time of your life, and people just think you're a pest to be eradicated. And so reading that book really helped me reframe that. Like maybe it wasn't me, maybe it was that part of society. And eventually we moved up to Seattle. I was a very enthusiastic Satanist at that time. So my conversion happened in 2011. And we moved up to Seattle, and I started writing for the Satanism Facebook page, which actually had a lot of followers, and we ran it kind of like a magazine. So I wrote articles, and I eventually became the editor-in-chief. And then in 2013, I started hearing about the Satanic Temple, and I was really interested in what they were doing and in their ethical system, which I thought was way better than LaVeyan Satanism by way of the Satanic Bible, because the Satanic Bible it's based on ideas from Ayn Rand and social Darwinism, and just this idea that, the world is a super competitive, cutthroat place, and you got to take what you want, and, screw the weak. And, I did get that self-compassion out of it, but that's not really what I saw most people taking out of it. So when I encountered the Satanic Temple, their tenets, their ethical system, I thought was way better. It was really common sense things that a lot of people couldn't believe in, like compassion and justice, and the fact that people are fallible. And, one of them has to do with believing in science, which is, something that is, really, there's a war over that as we speak today. So I saw those ethics, and I really liked them, and I really liked what the Satanic Temple was doing, which was, wherever Christianity had kind of inserted itself into government, the Satanic Temple was there also saying, okay, well, if you're going to let in one religion, you need to let in all of them, including us. So I really enjoyed that. And eventually I really wanted to help out more than just being, I had signed up to be a member on the website, but there wasn't much to that. So I wrote in and I asked if there was a Seattle chapter, and they said no, but they did offer the chance for me to apply to start one. So I did that and I got accepted, and I started that chapter in December 2014. So we were one of the first 5 chapters, and we're now the second oldest continuously running chapter. And I've seen the Satanic Temple grow from, like the first year it was maybe 6 to 8 people, and now I think we're up to 500,000 members signed up anyway. So, it's really grown, and I had a great time building this community here in Seattle, because I really was thirsty for that community. I'm a very social person, but I had never found a group that I felt comfortable with, partly because of the bullying. I have a darker aesthetic. I'm kind of weird. So there weren't too many places I really felt like I belonged, but the Satanic Temple was that kind of home that I'd been looking for a long time. So
Is it accurate to say that LaVeyan Satanism might be more geared towards the individual quest, and the Satanic Temple is trying to self-consciously working more on the community aspect for Satanists? Is that a fair statement?
I would say it's fair on the side of the LaVeyan belief system. Oh, sorry. But the Satanic Temple also is very much into individuality.
Okay.
It's an interesting mix, because we believe both in individual freedom and creativity and being yourself, but we also believe that people can achieve the most and get the most out of life when they are part of a community, when they're working together. Like that's kind of what science is tending to show us, is that we're social animals.
Right.
So it's a mix of both with the Satanic Temple.
Okay. How did this current book of yours, Compassionate Satanism, come about? Was it, did it kind of grow out of this desire to help out and maybe flesh out more about what, not only for yourself, but for others, as to what, being a member of the Satanic Temple is all about?
Oh yeah, definitely. So this book started life as a little guide that I put together for the Portland chapter of TST. I was kind of mentoring them and helping them start a chapter down there. And I thought it would be handy to kind of recount my experiences and, give them a little how-to guide. Because Seattle was such an early chapter, there was no international council or any governing body that helped guide the chapters. It was basically, just, figure it out, trial and error. So I figured I should probably pass on what I had learned through trial and error to those people who are starting that chapter. And then over time, there were a few things that drove me to want to make a whole book out of it. One thing is I put my community guide on my blog online, and I started hearing from a lot of other chapters and groups that had used those articles as a blueprint to create their own chapters. And so I thought, oh, well, this seems like it's, are you still there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. This computer is kind of old. So I heard from people that it was useful, and I thought, oh, well, I'd like to get it to more people. And then another thing was my first book, The Happy Satanist, was about my time as a LaVeyan Satanist. And I felt like I wanted to have something out that was about, my current Satanism, the Satanism that I had chosen. So I wanted something about the Satanic Temple. And then third, I wanted to find out if I could write a book from start to finish. because the Happy Satanist, my first book, was just a collection of essays that I had written, and not, a comprehensive beginning to end book. So, I kind of wanted to see if I could write one, and also like what that process might look like. So I was kind of teaching myself at the same time as I was writing it.
What kind of feedback have you gotten from readers so far?
So far, sorry, go ahead.
Have you gotten much?
I've started to get more and more. I don't do any advertising, so it's mostly word of mouth, and Facebook posts and stuff. But yeah, almost everything has been extremely positive. I've heard from friends and from strangers that like this was kind of the beginner's book that they needed, and they were really happy that it was out there for people who were just starting to look into Satanism, and that was really heartwarming. I did have there were a couple sources of negative, reviews or input. One was there's a whole set of people that have left TST as disgruntled ex-members, and they spend their time attacking TST. I don't know why they don't just move on and make something positive, but yeah, they spend.
It happens in every tradition.
Does it?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yay, us too. So let's see what they've said. Things like, oh, it's a TST puff piece. And then I also heard from a couple Satanists, one of whom said, why don't you acknowledge LaVeyan Satanism? That's the base of all Satanism. And if they'd actually read the book, they would see that I do mention it, because LaVey was the first one to really say, yes, we are Satanists. People aren't just calling us Satanists. We claim that title. But TST is not based on LaVeyan Satanism at all. It's based on romantic Satanism that was happening in the 1790s. So, we use an older source. But I do mention LaVeyan Satanism and the Church of Satan. And then the other person was a theistic Satanist, who said, hey, not all Satanism is non-theistic. There are theistic Satanists as well. And again, I do mention that in my book. But my book is not a comprehensive survey of all different kinds of Satanism that are out there, because I've experienced with LaVeyan, but not with the theistic side. This book is about my own personal experience. So, while I do mention those kinds of Satanism, I'm much more in depth about the Satanic Temple,
right,
since that's my path. So that's really the only negative feedback I've gotten so far. So
yeah, that's good. It's interesting how on the one hand you get the theistic Satanists who are upset that you're emphasizing the non-theistic Satanist part, whereas then you get Christians who assume that everything's theistic Satanism, and so everybody's got their assumptions that they're going with there. I will admit that I did kind of misread when I first saw the title of the book. I emphasized the title rather than the subtitle. When I saw Compassionate Satanism, my assumption was that you were articulating a particular vision of a form of Satanism that was trying to be proactive and compassionate. But then when you connect that to the subtitle, An Introduction to Modern Satanic Practice, are you kind of doing both? It's kind of as I look at it as an outsider, it's kind of an introduction to here's what it's like to be a member of the Satanic Temple, and here's an overview. But at the same time, is it also trying to articulate that by doing this, you can be a compassionate Satanist?
Yes, definitely. And also that title, the first part, the compassionate part, is it's like a personalizing part of the title, because for me, compassion is the highest goal, in my life. I sort of narrowed that down when I first fell in love with my husband. And I realized that compassion had always played the biggest role in my life in terms of things that were positive that happened to me, in terms of support, in terms of what made me feel happy and fulfilled. And especially Zen Buddhism and Buddhism in general emphasizes compassion as sort of the highest value. So I internalized that quite a bit during my Zen Buddhism days. So that's kind of like the personal part of the title. And then the second part is, basically giving an introduction to the Satanic Temple. And I struggled with the title for quite a while. The problem is, like, to describe Satanic Temple Satanism, I mean, it's not like you can just say LaVeyan Satanism. We don't call TST Satanism Greavesian Satanism. Lucian Greaves is not,
right.
Yeah, he really shuns the, being a charismatic leader and having people follow him personally. So the most accurate title that I could really think of was Modern Nontheistic Romantic Satanism. I think I've got all of those descriptors in there, but that was kind of a mouthful to put on the title. So that's why I reduced it down to Modern Nontheistic Satanism, or I think just Modern Satanism, because we're definitely the biggest, satanic organization. And then Compassionate Satanism was my shorthand for what kind of Satanism that is. It specifically also, compassionate really sets it apart from LaVeyan Satanism, which is very much not compassionate for most people. Oh, and that was one of the other negative pieces of feedback I got, was a LaVeyan Satanist saying, if it's compassionate, it can't be real Satanism. So kind of in my mind, it was almost a deterrent. Like, if you don't have compassion, I would rather you not be in my religion, kind of, and it is the Satanic Temple's first tenet, first commandment, I guess you might say. So that's where that came from.
Okay. Yeah. I had this week, I had a couple of colleagues at work who stumbled across my podcast, and we're just astounded that, the types of people that I talked to and the subject matter. And I was giving a little promo and wanted to see what the reaction was going to be too. And I said, well, I'm getting ready this week. I'm going to be talking to the author of the book, Compassionate Satanism. And the look on their face was like one of shock. I having worked, as an author and editor myself, I know the challenge of coming up with a title. It's got to resonate with you, your audience, the publisher, hopefully somewhat with outsiders too, so that you can, expand your reading audience.
Yeah.
With a book like this, there's just no way the average Christian isn't going to read it anyway. But when they hear, compassionate Satanism, it just causes all kinds of crazy machinations in the brain. Could you unpack that a little bit for readers who may not connect the dots between Satanism and the compassionate form of living life and living out of spirituality? How does that come together?
That's part of what happened with the rise of Romantic Satanism in the Revolutionary period, like the 1790s and forward. And that also, so that movement arose from a revolutionary Enlightenment-based reading of Paradise Lost by John Milton. So when John Milton wrote Paradise Lost, it was accepted as a straightforward, narrative of Satan's fall from heaven and the fall of man in the Garden of Eden. But in the late 1700s, a bunch of writers and also visual artists started seeing the Satan in Paradise Lost as this sort of heroic figure who stood for equality and rationality and like brotherhood, you hear fraternity, equality, liberty. and so all that stuff. And so compassion was part of that value set that they kind of pinned on that character. So obviously that's not at all the same character that is in the Bible. That's absolutely evil, right? So most people have that in their mind when they think of Satan. But for us, we really draw on that archetype that the Romantic Satanists not only sort of saw, but also, they elaborated on that kind of a character and used it as an allegory for their own revolutionary thoughts. So it was a time at which the monarchy and the church were losing control, and people had started thinking revolutionary thoughts. And, the American Revolution was first, and it really inspired these writers to think about, how they might do that in their own countries. So that was one of the values that was in that value set. They were thinking of in terms basically like humanism as opposed to divine right. So up to then, there had been kings and rulers that had been, given their right to rule by the church. They were considered to be God appointed, and, most people just lived in squalor and poverty and had to give most of what they created, up the chain to the king. So that began to be, taken apart, and unfortunately in a very bloody way in France. But eventually most nations, did move on to some form of democracy or a republic. And so that's where we're drawing our conception of Satan from. And that's where the compassion comes in. And you can really see it in the Satanic Temple really only has one main canon book, I guess you would say, and it's called Revolt of the Angels. And it's a pretty short satire novel. And in it, one of the fallen archangels is describing how Satan fell, and he explains that Satan and his angels fell to the earth and they experienced pain. And instead of seeing that as a negative thing, Satan, sits up and says, we should rejoice because in feeling pain, we now realize that other people feel pain and that we have compassion for them. So that really, hit me.
Yeah. What are a few of the takeaways that you would hope as an author that your fellow Satanists would take away from the book?
I think one of the biggest is the focus on individuality. And most of us Satanists already do. We generally tend to accept ourselves, but not always, especially if we've grown up in a family that doesn't accept us for, like being gay or trans or any of that stuff. I really like Satanists to understand that their diversity is a good thing. And also that we can still maintain our diversity of viewpoints, of, personal beliefs, and at the same time work together. And I also would love to see more Satanists come out with, if not like a big book, maybe a blog or a YouTube series, or I've seen now there's a lot of TikTok artists that are talking about their personal satanic practice or altar or whatever. And I just want to see more and more Satanists open up about what they're doing, because I believe that's really what Satanism is. We do have, this very small set of core beliefs, and we have the narrative of Satan and the symbol of Satan, but beyond that there's no there's no rules as to what your altar might look like or what you have to wear, anything like that. So I would love to see more people open up about it and kind of normalize it, both within our community, but also outside, so people who aren't Satanists can kind of get more of a well-rounded view of what exactly this kind of Satanism entails.
Well, that leads to my next and final question. Obviously, you wrote this as a Satanist, primarily for Satanists. Let's say that there are maybe a few open-minded Christians who pick up the volume, and what would you hope they would take away from it? There are a host of stereotypes and misunderstandings, and hopefully conversations like this help correct some of that. That's what we're trying to model. What would you hope as an author, they pick up your book, what would you like an open-minded Christian to take away from it?
I think just primarily that a Satanist can be a good person, and that Satanism can be a good force in the world, and that like maybe I'd also like them to consider what it means to bring religion into government, right? Because that's something that we work a lot on. I think a lot of Christians don't necessarily realize that if they bring their religion into the public sphere, whether it's in legislatures or courts or schools, for instance, any of those places, we are a pluralistic society. We have freedom of religion, and that means freedom for all religions. So if you're going to, sort of impose your religion on the public sphere, legally, other religions will have that same right. Now, whether that's actually protected in the courts is a big question, because like government and precedents and the courts have moved quite a bit in the direction of dominionism, where basically Christians want theocratic rule. They want us to be a nation ruled by Christian beliefs and Christian laws. So I don't know if that's always going to be protected, but in theory, we are a pluralistic society. And so if they want to bring one religion in, we're going to be there too. We had a case in Oklahoma. There was a 10 Commandments monument that was put on Capitol grounds, and we sued to place our monument of Baphomet. So it's like an 8-foot tall statue of, it's not a devil, although I think a lot of people misunderstand that it might be, but it's a figure from classical occultism that represents balance. But he's got horns and wings, and so we applied to put that there as well to balance out the 10 Commandments, so it didn't look like the government was pushing one religion. And then the Oklahoma Hindu Society, or I can't remember exactly what they're called, but a group of Hindu adherents in Oklahoma applied to put a big monument of Hanuman, the monkey god, the Hindu monkey god, on there. And so you can kind of see how if you open the door for one religion, you're gonna just get a cacophony of many different ones, potentially. So I would like them to think a little bit more before they request government access for religion, basically.
Mostly, go ahead.
But mostly, I'd love them to read it and come away with the realization that Satanists are people too. We're not out here killing babies and eating them, like some of the conspiracy theories are suggesting. We're here, collecting warm coats for the homeless. We just recently did a diaper drive here, and then a beach cleanup where we invited the public to help us, clean up the beaches here in Washington. And that's most of what we do, honestly, is community service. There are some legal battles that are fought, but they're pretty much at the top level. And the individual chapters, or I guess we're going to be called congregations pretty soon. We mostly try to serve our community, just like, a church would do. Mm-hmm. So we're not that different.
Yeah, well, I have enjoyed, I kind of stumbled into my relationships and conversations with Satanists. I've studied paganism for years and had those kinds of conversations. And then I started hearing more and more about the Satanic Temple and some of these public challenges of Christian privilege. And I thought, I need to find out more. And somebody connected me to Stephen Bradford Long, and we've had some conversations and collaborated on some projects before. And now you and I are having a conversation. So I find it fascinating. And one of the things I really appreciate about the Satanic Temple, whether or not you agree with the conclusions that are coming about, is it's causing us, as Joseph Laycock has said in one of his books, looking at how it has challenged this notion of what religion is in the public square and this kind of thing. So these are good conversations to have, even though those of us who are on the side that have had Christian privilege and have had the dominance for years makes us very uncomfortable, but these are the kinds of conversations we need to have. The alternative is we either have a naked public square where there's nothing but secularism, and there really is nothing objective about a naked public square, or we have a pluralist public square. And I think we have to work towards, having that pluralist public square. And a part of that process is putting forward our best ideas, living out the best of our faith, trying to persuade each other and letting it all sort out. That's kind of where I come from. So I don't know if any of that resonates with you.
Oh, definitely. I have to admit, my sort of perception of Christians and especially evangelicals has been completely changed by meeting you. I haven't bumped up against evangelicals in my personal life much, just in the legal battles that PST is fighting. And I was really both amazed and incredibly gratified to see you reaching out to other faiths, keeping your own, but also being open-minded to listen to other people. And so I thank you so much for, helping correct that misconception I had of Christians as closed-minded, or possibly even dangerous. Like we do get death threats on a regular basis. So I'm really, my perception has changed a lot, and I think it's a lot more positive because of what you're doing. So
I appreciate that. One of the things we're trying to do is that there are a handful of us in a network who have, we're confident in our convictions, just as those people that we're dialoguing with are confident in theirs, and yet there's also a sense of humility as we go out and do that. And so how can we build on that? How can we create within our own religious community and connect with others, those that have confidence in their convictions and yet also humility at the same time? I think that's the perfect mix that we've got to have. And unfortunately, there are a lot of, shall we say, problematic elements in any religious community.
Oh, yeah.
And, they get the most attention and make the most noise. And it's up to those of us who are trying to, model a different way forward to hopefully, make an impact. And I appreciate that when I reached out to you, here's this guy you've never heard of before. He's an evangelical and he's got a podcast and he wants me to come on. What might I expect? But I appreciate that you were willing to do that. And it's helpful for folks to get to know you and get to know about the book and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much. We've, our chapter has always tried to reach out to the various interfaith groups. And I know like our SoCal chapter actually did, I think they did a food drive or some kind of big collection charity drive with their local church, one of the local churches. So they worked together on that drive. And I would love to see more of that happening. Both our religions, I think, have a mandate to help other people And like working side by side, I think can be really conducive to understanding. We up here, we work at a big food distribution center that sorts and distributes food to all the food banks in the area. And sometimes when we're there working, there's also a church there working. And some really good connections and conversations have come out of that. We see each other in this, I'm going to say compassionate, helpful setting, and that helps break down some of those misunderstandings. So I would love to see more of that. And I'm really grateful for the work you're doing, not only, to help demystify Satanism, but all the other faiths that you've given a look at. And so thank you so much for all that work that you've put in. I know it must be a little hard sometimes within your own religion for people to kind of accept what you're doing. But I think if people actually go and see these conversations that you've worked so hard to bring to the table, I don't know, I think more minds might open a little bit. So
yeah, that's the hope. Well, I appreciate if please feel free once this podcast is published to use it to promote your book, if you want to take clips from it or what have you, and put it wherever you want as some kind of video to help promote the work. And if there's anything I can ever do within my circles to help bring Satanists together with Christians for respectful conversation, I would be more than happy to do so.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I will be for sure be sharing this everywhere I possibly can, because I think people need to know that there are people like you out there that are, not only open-minded, but, facilitating this positive connection in so many ways. So, yeah.
Well, my guest today has been Lilith Starr. And again, her book is Compassionate Satanism, an Introduction to Modern Satanic Practice. And in the program notes that go with the podcast, there will be a link to that and to her website where you can find out what she is doing. And I would encourage folks to seek that out. Also, if you continue watching this video at the very end, it'll give a recommendation for other videos to watch. And I'll include the conversation I had with Stephen Bradford Long. For those of you who would like more background about the Satanic Temple and what contemporary Satanism is all about, that Lilith and I did not have an opportunity to go into because we were focusing on her book today. So I would encourage folks to seek that out. Lilith, again, I want to thank you for being a guest on the program and talking about your book.
Absolutely. It was such an honor and quite a pleasure to chat with you. So thanks for having me on.
Of course. Again, this is John Moorhead. I am the host of the Multifaith Matters podcast. I'd like to thank everyone for listening and watching. If you would take a moment and click like and subscribe and share it in social media, that helps us get word out so that we can do more of this. Until the next podcast.